The the 85-86 season is a big season in the history of the football club, and I think when people talk about it, I think a lot of people overlook that because of what had happened in Belgium in Heysel, and the following season with the world's eyes on us, a new manager, and to think that Liverpool would go for a player manager. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? Could you imagine now Manchester City having a player manager? Well, you couldn't, could you? I mean, Vincent Kompany's gone back and he's player manager mandate, and everybody's up in arms, isn't it? But at that time, the best club side in Europe decided to go with a young player manager. So it was a big season. What I like about Kenny was that I think he managed to marry it all together. In that Bob Paisley was still at the club, although not in an official capacity, but he was still there. So he used Bob. And he had the experience of the backroom staff, which was obviously Ronnie and Roy as the most prominent ones. But he also had all the others who'd been there for years, Chris Lawler and John Bennison, and a lot of people had been there for years. And he used those, but then he also had his own ideas. He was a great watcher of games. So during the 80s, he would often come and watch Denmark play. And I used to say to him, why? He said, I just like the way you play. He liked flexibilities in teams. So the two teams he liked in the 80s was the Denmark international team and AC Milan. He was obsessed with AC Milan, who could Swiss system, play 4-4-2, play 3-5-2, the role of the sweeper. So he wanted he's looking at his Liverpool players and thinking, they can do that. Got bright footballers all over, people like Alan Hansen and Mark Lawrence, bright footballers. I can do that. And he threw it on us. Everton away. Goodison Park early on in the season. He was well aware how good Everton were, Sharp and Lineker up front. And he goes, we're going to play three at the back today. And everybody went, what do you mean we're going to play three at the back? He said, Lawrence and Hansen, and he said, Jan will play as a spare man at the back. We hadn't practiced this. He relied on us being able to carry out his orders, and first 45 minutes we winning 3-0. Come in at half time, we're winning 3-0. Played really well. But then the second half, the backlash came from Everton. We held on and won 3-2. But that was some of the things. As I said before, Kenny was massively into all that, being able to be flexible and whatever. But the whole season as a whole went quite well. It took a while before. It was probably the most changes that had been made in a team at Liverpool for at least 10 years. You probably got to go back to around the time when Shankly retired in 1974, because within weeks of Kenny taking over, we changed Phil Neal as the right back, and now the right back was Steve Nicol. We changed Alan Kennedy as the left back. The left back was now Jim Beglin. We had two new guys in midfield. Steve McMahon we bought from Aston Villa. I'd got into the team. And Kenny, because he's a player manager, was now playing less and less and less. So the front two for a while was Paul Walsh and Ian Russ, plus Craig Johnson had forced his way in on the right side of midfield instead of Sammy Lee. So look at all those changes, which was very unlike what Liverpool used to do. So it took a while for everything to fall into place. And I think it took a while before the fans went. Because the fans have been used to for a long time to see the best, and I think they sort of looked and went, and our start wasn't great, and obviously the fact that Manchester United raced away and won the first 9 or 10 games or whatever, and and Everton was still very strong, and I think a lot of people thought, ooh, but I always feel that the turning point, and it's not because I played a big part in it, but I always think that Milk Cup game against Manchester United, because of the start they'd made, and it was important for our group of players to have that big result, and that was, I think, that was the one where you sense that things changed after, and they went, this team will probably be okay. Although, as is well documented, it took Alan Hansen a little bit longer because he said this is the worst team I've ever played in. But once it fell into place, the only problem we had was that when I think it was in February 1986, we played Everton at Anfield, and this could be the title decider, and we lost 2-0, and then I think we're 8 points behind with the game, and then you realise this is going to be tough, But all we can do now is win our games. We won our games, and they didn't win enough. We pipped them on the last day of the season, so that was great. And then, of course, a week later, we get a chance to win the FA Cup, and that was my real first taste of the FA Cup. One of the reasons I came to England, one of the things that I used to love about English football was a tradition, and obviously that traditional last game of the season, the FA Cup at Wembley, and we were in that in '86, and you sort of felt it in the run up We played Norwich first. I did that, and then we got a really tough draw at Chelsea away, but we won that one. And then, as you always do, it was York City again. We played York City the year before, and again they gave us a lot of trouble. Knocked them out after a replay, and then Watford with John Barnes flying. We had to go to Watford as well for a replay, and managed to beat them Southampton in the semi-final at White Hart Lane. But there was a certain amount of excitement in the dressing room because the FA Cup was the one trophy that had eluded all the players. You could say to Kenny, have you won everything in the domestic game? And he would go, well, almost, but none of us had ever won the FA Cup. So to get to the final, and then the excitement, I think also because now there's a chance of winning the double. And for as much as Liverpool have won over the years, they'll be short of a double, They've never ever managed that. So it was the most excited I've seen that group of players, even more so than the European Cup final 12 months earlier against Juventus, because they did that in 84 as well, didn't they? And they did that in 81, and so they've done all that before, but this FA Cup was different. And I think because it was against Everton as well, there's a real chance, isn't there? Because people are starting to talk about a shift of power, but where is this going to end? But this Everton team was so good, And then the game itself comes, and I think if you look back in hindsight at the game, there was nothing that really surprised you. They were good. For a long time, they denied us the right to play. They got in amongst us, and people like Reid and Bracewell in midfield, and obviously Sharp and Lineker up front and whatever. And they managed to get themselves a goal. And I always remember half time running around in that dressing room. People always ask what happens in dressing rooms at half time, and sometimes, or more often not a lot happens, because what they would always say to us is that you've done this before, lads. Let's just find our feet, let's find our rhythm, let's get playing. I always remember Ronnie Moran, the one thing he always said, don't go too behind. We were 1-0 down. He said, don't go 2-0 behind. He said, got 2-0 against these. He said, I'm not sure we can turn that around. He said, stay in the game, hang in the game, hang in the game and wait. Just wait and wait and wait and wait. And, how we got back into the game was because they made a mistake. They'd been well organised all game and they made a mistake. And we scored, and then we do what we always do. It's like, this is the moment now, isn't it? I played with Ajax for 2 years, and we were great entertainers. I played with Denmark in the 80s, and we wouldn't be a million miles away from having been the best international team in the 80s, yeah? But we didn't always know the time of day. And that was the one thing with Liverpool. Now we win the game. Now we win the league. This is it now. This is crucial. So when we equalised against Everton, and you think this will have an impact on Everton, because the only thing that really changes games is goals. So when we equalised, you kind of think everybody went, because when we celebrated in the corner, Craig Johnson, Rushy and me and whatever, but all the others on the halfway line, Hansen and they're all on the halfway line ready. Come on, we got 10 minutes. It's like last order of the bar. You got 10 minutes to order your last pint. And there's the lads are saying, listen, we've got 15 minutes here before they recover. We got 15 minutes, yeah. So come on. And in the next 15 minutes was when we settled the game. We ran away. We took the sting out of it. So until we equalised Everton's game, then we had our spell, and then once we scored 3-1, the game was done. Then they had the last 15 minutes again. So it's like knowing your time, and now we really do it, And then, if only we'd have took a bit more time out to maybe just for 24 hours celebrate a little bit, Because I always remember when we won the double at Ajax, and we went into the square in Amsterdam, and our club suits off and throwing ties to the fans and celebrating and singing until 6 o'clock in the morning. We never did that at Liverpool, because it was always go and get yourself a beer and then come back next season. So I'm not saying it's a criticism, but I just think sometimes when you look at that homecoming 2019 for many of the players will always be as memorable as the match itself, because it was beyond anything you could have ever expected, isn't it? You think, all right, we're going to win the Champions League. There's going to be a homecoming, and there'll be 300,000-400,000 people there. No, there was 1 million people there, So I sometimes look back, and I'm not an emotional guy, but it's memories, isn't it? So, but we did things different. We did things at Liverpool. We made sure we got the job done, and we never had to shove it in anyone's faces. We just did what we did, and even when they talk about opposition players and any of our players have any problems, I said, no, I think a lot of the opposition in many ways just respected the way that things were done. It wasn't like we respect the way Steve McMahon and Ronnie Whelan behaved, but we expect the way the Liverpool Football Club behaved, So I think there was a lot of respect for for the way that they did things, and they would always ask us, be as humble as you can, and I think that helps you being successful for 25 years, because really that is the period, isn't it? Liverpool had a 25-year run of almost winning everything.